Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, optimize, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Christian Brim. Hi, Christian.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Exceptional. It's the day after Thanksgiving, so it can't get much better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Christian, you are an advocate, advisor for small businesses for over 27 years now.
Correct.
And we're going to talk exactly how you help businesses grow and thrive.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about the profit first methodology for creatives.
Yes, we are.
Which I find fascinating. And when I learned about it, I wanted you to be a guest on the podcast because I'm very interested to talk about that. And I'll tell you why. You know, I have many creatives that contact us or that I come into contact with. And somehow there is this misconception that processes and procedures are not for creative people, which I
think that they tend to think of themselves that way. I think you've met creative people where it's like hard to follow the conversation, or like, where is this coming from? And I think my experience is that their brains don't function the way we analyticals do from point A to point B, which is what makes them beautiful and creative. But I would say that processes aren't what they naturally gravitate to. No.
Right. But, you know, I interviewed several creatives on my podcast that have very successful digital marketing agencies, artists, etc. And when they are successful, they understand the importance of having processes for the repetitive steps that need to happen anyway in order for them to then have the freedom to create.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the processes give you creative space. It unclutters the things that prohibit creativity. I think the best entrepreneurs are ones that combine both the creative element, because all entrepreneurs are creative, right? I mean, they're creating something new. It might be a new product, new service, new customer, new geography, whatever. But all entrepreneurs are creative. And when you can combine the creative aspect with the process, operational, analytical side of it, you get magic, rocket fuel.
You definitely do, and I agree with you, and that's what I've seen. So tell me and tell our listeners a little bit about the profit first if they're not familiar with it.
Sure.
And how did you end up adapting it or helping creative with that methodology?
Sure. So Profit First by Mike Michalowicz was published 10 years ago. And it is, I don't remember the number of copies or languages it's been translated into, but it's a powerful book. I would suggest anybody read it just to hear Mike's story. It's a powerful story of what led him to create Profit First. I mean, he's not an accountant. He's just an entrepreneur like the rest of us. And we have been associated with his Profit First Professionals Network for 10 years. I heard him speak at an event I think 3 months after he'd published the book. And I was sold on it immediately. And I think the reason why was I saw the simplicity of the system for the business owner, because it met them where they are and their natural habits that made it a very powerful tool. How we got to Profit First for Creatives was 3 years ago. We did a very MBA-like analytical deep dive into who we wanted our target customer to be. We asked two questions. We said, okay, of our team, I said, okay, who do you like working with, and who gets the most value from what you do? And I was tongue in cheek on it being high level MBA style, because it was not. It was very simple. I mean, we didn't look at profitability. We didn't look at anything. We just asked those two questions. And when we got the list together and we were looking at it, the thing that kept showing up were creative businesses, folks that are in marketing or videography or, interior design, those types of folks. And so that's what prompted me to write the book. But it was interesting when I approached Mike about the title. There are several derivative books that have been written for Profit First, Profit First for optometrists, or Profit First for lawn care. There's been several books. And when I had this idea, Profit First for Creatives, and I went to him, I wasn't even sure that he was going to approve it, because creatives is not an industry, right? It's not one thing. But he did approve it, and we wrote the book and published it earlier this year.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about some of the principles of the Profit First and Profit First for Creatives. What makes it specific for creatives?
Well, the thing that is specific in this book to creatives is it tackles some of the mindset issues that creatives struggle with money. The principles of Profit First are the same in Profit First for Creatives as in the original book, and all of the derivatives. The system's the same. But as I was writing the book, I interviewed several clients. I delved back through my own experience as an entrepreneur, and I came up with this core message of the book, and it's actually the subtitle, which is Transforming the Creative Money Paradigm. Because a lot of creatives think that they either have to, they think of it as a either or statement. They have to choose to do what they don't love to make money, or they can do what they love, but they don't necessarily make money at it. And I don't think that is a true statement. I think that long-term profitability has to come from creativity. And then to that extent, I think creatives are in a unique position because they have skills that a lot of other entrepreneurs don't have.
Like what?
Well, like creativity. I mean, it's our business, for instance, we're in the accounting and finance space, and it's, very analytical. You wouldn't think about using creativity in our industry, but we have to overcome that inclination to look at everything as point A to point B in straight lines. Whereas creatives they don't get boxed in that way. They see potentials and paths that we analytical types don't see oftentimes.
Right. So how do you see that, like in your book, what advice do you give them in terms of handling the finances, in terms of being smarter about it, or being more organized, or whatever advice you give them? Let's talk about that. So in your book, what advice do you give them?
Well, the first thing I address in the book is the mindset around money. Profit First is a tool. It's a great tool. And as Mike says, it's successful 100% of the time it's implemented correctly. But people get hung up implementing it and using it, and it's usually around bad behavior. And I say bad in the context of it's not profitable. Um, so we address a lot of the mindset issues because the tool is only good if you have the right intent. I use the example in the book about if you try to use a hammer to put in a screw, it doesn't work well. That's not the hammer's fault or the screw's fault. It's you didn't know what it was designed for. And so, really thinking about profit as a requirement of having a sustainable business. Like it's not optional. If you want a business, you have to make profit. And a lot of creatives, frankly, are stuck in this mindset that what they do is not necessarily real work or assigning a lower value of what they do to the work that they perform. And so we talk a lot
Yeah, just
about,
that point. I'm going to stop you there because
yeah,
I think I mean, you're right. I observed it as well. And that is a point that we as society, we have to change the mind. I mean, the mindset has to be changed within the creatives themselves, but also with society, because if we don't have those creatives, we're going to have a really boring, unproductive, not interesting. There is going to be never going to be something new. There's going to be no invention. There's going to be no joy, right? So
yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with education. I think the way we educate children, the way I was educated, it's all on what's measurable, standardized tests and those things. And not that those methodologies or those subjects are not important, that they are, but the idea of putting things like music and art and those nonlinear things to a lower standard is really detrimental because I think what happens is a lot of people, it was with me. I mean, you show up in adulthood and someone says, well, you're creative. And you're like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yeah, you are. You're a human being. Of course you're creative. We've just suppressed all of it. We've programmed it out of our brains.
that is so true. And I think that's the shift. I mean, it's the mindset, shifting the mindset of the artists themselves, of the creatives, but also shifting the mindset of society at large, because you're right, we're all creative. As
Yes.
human beings, just the fact that we're doing, even as accountants, you are creative, like not in a bad way, not as creative like numbers and changing it, but there is some beauty to it, to, the numbers reconciling and falling into place, right? Or really understanding complex things that others might not understand, or maybe figuring out how to explain complex things in simple ways that have a degree of beauty to it.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's one of my favorite stories is the story of Walt and Roy Disney. And as they were building Disney World, Walt came in. His brother Roy was his operations guy. He made things happen, and Walt was the visionary. And Walt came into Roy's office and he said, I want this monorail that we're building to go through the hotel. And Roy's like, well, we already have the plans. Like, it cost us like $1 million just to redo the plans. And Walt's like, I don't care, make it happen. Well, the monorail does go through the hotel, so they figured it out. But without those creative people to see possible and push us, it gets it gets dull. I like that word, dull.
It does. It gets dull. I think it's a very good explanation, a very good description. Okay, so we start with mindset. What other things you addressed in your book that you feel they correspond or they have to do only with creatives, or they will resonate better with creatives?
Well, one of the things that I have a whole chapter in the book around value pricing. And, you know, your traditional business owners in general are awful at pricing. I know I am. And we leave a lot of money on the table by not thinking about pricing in the right way. And the easy way to think about pricing is to think, well, we've got these costs and we want to make this amount of profit. And so that you add those together and that's how you figure out your pricing. This is what we're going to charge. And that may or may not work for you. The reality though is the pricing is driven by the buyer, by the client or customer. And it's the value they receive or perceive that dictates what they're going to pay. And the whole idea of value pricing is to flip that uh, methodology so that you're thinking in terms of how much value am I delivering. The reason why a lot of people don't approach it that way is because it's hard. Like you have to have a deep understanding of the problem you're fixing for a customer or client and what that value is to them. And a lot of times they don't know the value themselves, right? That, you know, that they have to be educated on what it's worth to them. For instance, I mean, accounting is a great example. Um, most people, most business owners would say there's no value in accounting. There's no value in what we do, and they would be right in a lot of cases. But
Well, they will have a different idea when they sit in jail because they didn't pay their taxes.
right. But it's always seen as a necessary evil, right? Um, Whereas if we reframe the solution in terms of, okay, you're a business owner, you're stressed about your finances because you don't know how much money you have in the bank, you don't know how much you've made in profit, how much you owe in taxes, and if you're not making enough money so that you're always worried about paying bills, you don't really know how to fix that. Like, okay, how do I make more money? If you reframe it in terms of delivering the solutions to that, then your solution becomes much more powerful and much more valuable. How much value would you put on saying that I can help you increase your profit by 10%? Well, that's a huge number in some cases, right? And it might not be huge for some businesses, but it's definitely more value than just saying, well, I'm going to file you your taxes so the IRS doesn't come and harass you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Although there is value to that as well, you know.
Sure. No, there is, but it's
I
a
mean, if
lower
you have a
value.
business owner that had an accountant before that didn't do that, and they got all the just the time and the attention and the emotions that are connected to it, there is a value to that as well.
Yeah, and money, um, look, there is no substitute for having a profitable business, working capital in the bank, and you know the peace that brings, the space that brings to be able to think proactively and think creatively is huge, as opposed to being reactionary and just running around putting out fires.
Absolutely. So what are some of the advice like to our listeners if they want to reevaluate their pricing or they want to look at value pricing? What are some of the methodologies or advice, best practices that you can recommend?
I use a document called Lean Canvas, and it came out of the book Lean Startup that's published, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago. The book Lean Startup was directed towards tech startups, and it's essentially a one-page business plan. But I find it very effective to use for existing businesses as well. And there's several components to the Lean Canvas because it's the entire business plan on one page. But the elements that I focus on and we walk through in the book with examples is understanding what the problem is that you're solving for your customer or your client, understanding what that problem is. And I think the challenge for existing businesses is being able to define it in the words that the customer or client uses. For existing businesses, it's real easy to get caught up in what we do. So like, payroll, bookkeeping, accounting, taxes, right? That's what we do. Our clients don't, those words are not in their vocabulary, maybe taxes, but like it's not something they think, and they definitely don't define their problem in those terms, right? But if you can't define the problem in words that the customer uses, you're missing something. Like you don't have a complete answer yet of what that problem is. And then figuring out how your solution fixes that problem and what the value is to that customer. Those are the key components, but the Lean Canvas is the tool that I recommend.
Right. And I think you also gave very good advice in terms of really understanding the problem. And, if you have an existing business, in some ways, it's easier than to define that as opposed to a new business, because you can go and ask your customers. And it's a key thing. You have to survey your customers as to what are the problems, what are you solving, what is the value, and don't be afraid to ask those questions, regardless of what the answer might be, because if there is a problem, you'll be able to solve the problem, but that will allow you to really understand what a problem is.
Yes. And to your point, you have to ask questions, and you have to shut up and listen, and you can't bring your prejudices to the table, because, your experience is a prejudice. I'll give you an example. We spent 6 months this year retooling and rebranding our service offerings that we're going to launch in January. And there was an epiphany at one point as I was listening to a client interview, and the solution that we were providing was so simple, we'd missed it. Like we had gone on to more important things to us, because surely it can't be just this that we're solving for them, right? But it was like transformational for that person. Once they had that insight and that information, they were like, oh, okay, now I get it. And it was so simple to us, we missed it.
Yep. So it's definitely not assuming anything. Just we talked about it, it's like really observing and asking and finding out. And then that is the value, and calculating the number that is the value. And obviously you need to do some market research as well, because you need to adjust yourself to compare yourself with what the market will bear, but you have to have a value to what you are selling.
Well, I think the point of value pricing is that once you know the value for the customer, that defines the upper limit of what you can charge, right? But if you don't know what it really is, what that value really is, you're leaving money on the table, as are your competitors, right? Because they're providing an incomplete solution to the problem.
Correct. That's exactly right. Well, Christian, you're definitely full of information. And if our clients our listeners would like to find out more about you, talk to you more, reach out, get more information about what you do, how can they get a hold of you?
The easiest place is my personal website, christianbrim.com. And the books available for sale there, our podcast, The Profitable Creative, is there. All of my social handles, et cetera, and my blog. So that's where I'd send folks.
Excellent. Well, Christian, it's been a pleasure for you to be a guest here, and we had a great conversation. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.